Okay.
So, I'm Mitch Goth, and I ghost hunt because my last name calls for it. Just kidding. So, I have been ghost hunting for, about 10 years now, which sounds ridiculous as I say it. It doesn't seem like that long, but I've done close to 100 investigations in those years, pushing 100, getting real close, and I'm counting the investigations until I get there. And so I wasn't always a paranormal believer, though. I grew up a skeptic, a very, logical kid. You'd see the shows on TV, and that's what they were. They were TV. They were entertainment. And it wasn't until I was 14 when I went on my first ghost hunt ever that I actually, changed my tune. And you sort of think that a skeptic wouldn't want to do something like that, but I was intrigued. At the outset, it was something to do on the weekend. It was, I was a freshman in high school, and I wanted something fun to do. So I had just moved into a new neighborhood, and I knew one of the neighbor kids, and the neighbor kid's parent was a very seasoned paranormal investigator. By then, they had been doing it for about 15 years, and my school friend went with them, pretty often. My school friend went with them pretty often, and so I quickly got intrigued just to the concept. It'd be a story to have, something I could tell people about, something that I did. And the place we went is gone now, but because it's gone, I can tell you about it. So it was a private building. It was long abandoned by the time I got there. It was a restaurant and a bar before it closed, but prior to that, it was a opulent mansion styled in the size and shape of the White House. And the things I experienced there were just insane. And I've investigated there several times prior to its demolition, and to this day, it's the most haunted place I've ever been, and I'm pretty sure I will ever be. If there's ever a place that I find that's more haunted than there, it'd blow my mind. It'd be absolutely ridiculous. I would have a hard time believing anything like that. And the place was called the Manor in Beloit, Wisconsin, and locals probably still know about it, even so many years after its demolition. But in terms of the paranormal community, it was a well-kept secret. People had rumors, people had stories, but the group I was with felt and were very honored to be there and to go there and to investigate there and to speak to the spirits that were there, the family members of the original family who owned the building. And I still remember the first night, I should say, that I went there. We drove up this long, long driveway, and it was just in the middle of what would otherwise be a commercial district. Like, there was a Target, 100 yards away, a Walmart about 200 yards in the other direction, and just stuck in the middle of all this commercialism was this old, abandoned house. And I went in there a skeptic, and I came out something completely different. And it stemmed from one particular experience that we had while we were there. I was sort of like a school kid, not really knowing what to do, on their first day of school. I was exploring, doing things that now I know I shouldn't have done, like whispering and messing with things, like making sounds that would inhibit EVP recording. But the people who took me there were kind enough to educate me on all the things I needed to do and needed to get better at. And shortly after we entered the place, I knew something was off about it. And it wasn't just that it smelled like abandonment and pee. It wasn't just that it was covered in graffiti. It wasn't just that every window was broken out and covered in plywood. It was something entirely unexplainable. It was an energy, a heaviness, sort of like wearing a lead vest as soon as you walked in, like you were going in for an x-ray. Like it weighed on your shoulders, it weighed on your chest, it weighed on your brain, on your mind, on your heart, on your soul. It weighed. And that that was the first time I'd ever experienced something like that. So going in there being the young, doe-eyed little skeptic that I was a little taken aback. Like, this isn't just an abandoned building. This is something stranger. And that strangeness very quickly showed itself. And my very first definitive paranormal experience happened shortly after that, about an hour into the investigation. So the lead investigator of the team had this boxy EMF detector called a tri-field meter that is analog, but it's incredibly accurate. And they call it a tri-field because it measures 3 different things almost simultaneously. So I didn't know what exactly it was then, but I know all about it now. It's something that's embedded into my brain for a very simple reason. And the simple reason, and I'll get to that, is that it made sound. When you turned it on and it read something, when the little ticker went back and forth, it made a noise. It made a wheeing sound. And that by itself seemed rather innocuous, but what they did with it was rather interesting. And they took it to a far end of the second floor while we were doing an investigation near the main stairwell of the building. And they set it down in the corner, and they said, okay, we're going to leave it, and if any spirit wants to come over here, you can come over here and you can make this device, activate. You can make it make sound. You can make the needle go up and down. And while we were there, that never happened, but something else far more significant did. Not long after we set that up and began the investigation, I was just sitting along the sidelines, watching everything happen, watching these people speak their questions into thin air, and talking to people who absolutely weren't there. Having their voices echo through an empty building and nothing come back, or at least what I thought was nothing. And they gave me this little earpiece that I could wear. It was an amplifier, sort of like what you would know as a bionic ear, but much smaller. And this bionic ear was my best friend then, because that was basically the only piece of equipment they let me have. And I was just sitting there listening to everything, and they told me how everything worked, how EVP worked, that, yeah, it's going to seem like you're talking to absolutely nothing, and like you're crazy, like you're just standing around in an abandoned building talking to yourself. But they knew well enough, and I soon learned that that's not what it is. It is communicating with human beings who have died, and you're communicating with voices that you can't hear but absolutely still exist. Well, I should say, most of the time you can't hear them. And I learned the intricacies of that lesson shortly after, because I was sitting there right next to the makeshift bars of the stairwell, because they had long since been ripped out, and the stairwell was essentially a giant hole in the second floor where some broken down stairs happened to be. And so I was sitting there right next to the stairwell, waiting eagerly for something to happen, waiting for a door to slam, waiting for something to crash downstairs, waiting for my horror movie idea of what a paranormal experience was to happen. Of course, the horror movie things never happened, but something did. And what it was as we were communicating with these spirits, and nothing was coming through, at least audibly to our own ears or to my little bionic ear, nothing was coming through. And then, I don't remember the question, but I remember the response. And somebody asked a question, and shortly after, you heard this high-pitched sound, this penetrating noise. And it sounded, I couldn't put my finger on it, really nobody could. And then somebody thought of it, the tri-field meter. And so everybody ran over to check what the tri-field meter was doing. And the tri-field meter was doing nothing. There was no reading on the tri-field meter. The sound was not coming out of that little box. The sound was coming from something we don't know. And everybody caught it on their recorders. And we listened to it back many, many times in the years since then. To this day, we don't know where it came from, but we know what it was, and it was a scream. It was a scream of a little girl. And what struck me so much about it was not that it was a scream, not how it sounded, not the inflection that was given to it, not the sort of person I thought that it came from, but where it came from. It didn't come from someplace in the building. It didn't come from downstairs or in the corner or in another room. It came from everywhere. Everywhere had this sound. You could walk across the building, which by then was completely disconnected from the power grid, completely disconnected from water. There was nothing running through the walls. It was an empty shell of a structure. And this scream went on for about 30 seconds. And I came out of that 30 seconds a believer. I came out of that 30 seconds dumbfounded. I came out of that 30 seconds amazed and forever interested. And I'm interested to this day. And I think part of what drives me to keep doing this, to keep investigating, is the recollection of that everywhere scream, that sound that was utterly unexplainable, that no matter how many times I listened back to it, no matter how many different ways I tried to rationalize, tried to understand some natural cause, nothing could have ever materialized out of that. It was paranormal. And when the scream ended, I could tell everybody thought the same way. The people who had been on numerous investigations, the people who had been doing this for years, were standing around completely wide-eyed, like they could not believe what they had heard. And I understood that completely because I was in utter disbelief. We had no idea what had happened, but I learned later that one of the spirits there was, in fact, a little girl, and her name was Hope, and she was one of the original family members who lived in the mansion when it was built. And nobody's quite sure what happened to her after the family had left the home, but EVPs captured there seemed to indicate something sinister, because while we were there, while the investigators there were speaking out into the empty void that I thought was all there was, a response did come through. An EVP did come through, and it was significant. And the voice that came through was in the response to the question, who died? And the spirit who responded was an older woman who whispered very close, very, very collectedly, never finding out. And then, shortly after, an unmistakable gunshot. We didn't hear that gunshot when we were there. We didn't hear anything resembling it. And yet, this gunshot, clear as day, rang through, and nobody responded to it, because nobody heard it. And that alone was enough to put my jaw on the floor, to leave me forever interested. And so I left that building the first time not wanting to leave, wanting to find out more, wanting to stay there in that gross, empty, graffiti-filled, abandoned structure forever, trying to find answers to the things that I thought I knew when I went in there. And ever since then, it's been just trying to track down answers, trying to determine the sorts of things that I had witnessed, that I had seen there, and every place prior, or every place after, that I'd seen every place after. And since then, I've thought a lot about that building, and I believe it was a half dozen investigations that I did there. That's where I cut my teeth. The most haunted place I had ever been was the place where I trained to do the thing I still do, and the things I'm doing now for this, the paranormal research that I work tirelessly to create, to find answers for. It all started there, and I don't think I would be in the place where I am now if I had gone anywhere else for my first couple investigations. it was the sort of place where you capture an EVP a minute. It was where I learned just how to pick up electronic voice phenomena, just where I learned how to utilize all the devices and how to utilize them perfectly. Because every time you used them, something happened. It wasn't a matter of, theory that, if you do this at a certain time, this device will do this, or a spirit will say this, and you will catch it. It happened every single time. And never have I ever been to a place like that since. But the places I've been to after that, I've always strived to work as if it were the manner, as if it were catching an EVP a minute, as if it were communicating directly with the most active spirits you could find. And it's where I learned another very important aspect, that, yeah, it can get spooky sometimes, it can get scary, but at the end of the day, at the end of the night, what you're doing is, you're quite simply talking to another human being. The only difference is one of you is alive and one of you is not. And that is the crux of why I do what I do now, because so many people I see, they go to get scared. They go to get a thrill. They go for the adrenaline rush, the same reason someone goes on a roller coaster. But that's fundamentally not what it is. It's a matter of something more important. It's a matter of communicating with another person from a different era, from a different time, who knows different things, who says different things, who believes different things, who can provide different perspectives on thoughts on matters. And if you communicate well enough, you can learn these things about these spirits, these passed on people. And that's always what I've strived to do. It's not to get scared. It's not to, get a little adrenaline pumping through my blood. It's to learn. It's to learn from people who you thought you couldn't learn from anymore. It's to learn from people who don't have lungs, who don't have mouths, who don't have tongues to communicate, but still manage to do so, and can imbue you with so much education, so much knowledge that it's impossible to find anywhere else. And you're doing something significant when that happens, when you collect information that you knew you couldn't get anywhere else. Because it's true that as generations go, cultures die out with them, ideas die out with them, thoughts, perceptions, realities die out with the generations of people who die as well. And you might think that as generations of people die, everything about them goes away too, but that's not the truth. They're still there, and they'll tell you their story if you listen well enough, and you listen close enough, and you ask the right questions. And that's always what I've strived to do. Ask the right questions, learn the right things, get to know these human beings who are just on the other side of some spectrum that we're not quite to the point of understanding yet. And I've had a lot of people ask me about my views on the afterlife, being that I hunt ghosts, I investigate and research paranormal occurrences, passed on lives. And it's a complicated thing, because when I started out doing what I do, I was a member of an organized religion. For the sake of all organized religions out there, I'm not going to name which one it was, but since then I have departed from the idea of organized religion, and I've spent a lot of time very critically considering the concept of the afterlife and the concept of death and what it means to die and what it means to live afterwards. And science, the well-known non-pseudo science, dictates certain things about our reality. But there are things that science can't answer, and there's things that science has partial answers to that provide very bleak viewpoints to what things happen. So in a scientific sense, you are your brain. That's it. You are a bundle of ooey gooey gray nerves piloting a meat suit. And when your meat suit dies out, the bundle of nerves up here deteriorates into nothing. And that's exactly what you do. Deteriorate into nothing. A dark, endless, bottomless void, sort of like you were never alive at all. And that's depressing as hell. So, I have been out here doing many things, but one of them is to try and find answers, because out of all the critical considerations and logical thoughts I've given to the concept of death and the afterlife, one thing that I can't simply wrap my mind around, can't consider as scientific truth, is that when you die, you're just gone, as if you were never here. I can understand scientifically why it might be easy to understand that and to believe that, but personally, psychologically, I just don't buy it. There's so much to human existence, to human life, that is beyond the realm of the science that we know now, beyond the comprehension of an individual human mind, or even a hive mind of intelligentsia. It's unexplained. It's currently paranormal, but I believe the goal to this is to make the paranormal normal, to collect evidence, to use scientific method, to produce answers, to produce solutions to scientific issues that have plagued the community for hundreds of years. Answer questions always thought unanswerable, because I believe there's an answer to every question. You just need to find all the right pieces. And that's a big reason why I'm continuously doing this, because I want to talk to the people. I want to learn from them. I want to understand who they are, but I also want to understand who I am. I want to understand both who I am personally and who I am conceptually as a human being, and who they were and who everybody else around me is, the complexities of human life, the human psychology that moves on after bodily form is over. And there's always that well-known concept that energy cannot be created or destroyed, that it simply changes, that it changes form. And I think that death isn't quite as simple as we make it out to be. The afterlife isn't quite as simple as we make it out to be. But it's a very scary thing. It's a very depressing thing that life can end, that our time on this planet, on this plane of existence, is finite, that your clock is ticking down to an eventual zero. Everybody's clock is ticking down to an eventual zero, but I don't believe for 1 second the zero is absolute, that the zero is it, that there's not anything more, that there's not any negative numbers there. There has to be, and I've proven to myself time and time again through these dozens of investigations that that zero isn't absolute, that there is more to it. My goal now is to help everybody else understand, help everybody else grasp the concepts that we're dealing with and we're working with, the human lives that we're communicating with, the afterlives that we're connecting to, that there's more than just having a given faith or not having any faith, or even faith at all, or the current idea of science. There's so much more outside the bounds of everything we know, and everything we think, and everything we feel. And science, faith, life, afterlife. It's all always progressing. And this is an important part of it. This is a pivotal part of that. And sooner or later, the answer will come. That I believe wholeheartedly. We will not be in the dark forever about what happens after you die, where you go, where your soul goes, if there is a soul, what we are after our bodies are not. The answer will come, and I'm just doing my part, trying as hard as I can to get the answers that I need, that everybody wants and everybody needs. You know, because you don't need to have a given faith. You don't need to have a rigid following of what science currently states, because both of those things are always changing, and I believe paranormal research and paranormal investigation is a massive part of that change, a massive part of moving forward, moving the idea of human life forward. And it fascinates me. Through every investigation I've ever been on, be it in a massive insane asylum or prison, or in some countryside cemetery that life and current generations have forgotten about, it fascinates me. And there's always answers to find. And there's always people to talk to. Because even these countryside cemeteries that time has forgotten, that human beings currently alive have forgotten, because of this work, I haven't forgotten those places. I haven't forgotten those people. And I think it's pivotal to the continued existence of a human life, be it currently alive or in the afterlife form, to be remembered, or at the very least to be not forgotten, and to communicate with a spirit who died a century, 2 centuries, 3 centuries ago, and have them speak to you, have them communicate, probably for the first time in centuries, is something uniquely profound, something that you're not going to find doing anything else in life. And yeah, it's just blows my mind, and it keeps it together simultaneously. And that's why I do what I do, and that's why I started doing what I'm doing, and that's why I still do it, and that's why I'm probably still gonna do it forever, until the day that I die, and probably for a long time after that. I'm gonna be a paranormal researcher, because it's fascinating, because it's cutting edge, because it's important, not just to me, not just to the people doing it with me, but to the human lives we're communicating with, to the people who maybe haven't had a communicator with them for decades or centuries or even longer than that. And there's this ongoing concept of everywhere is haunted, and I firmly believe that so much has happened throughout the entire existence of all humanity. The sidewalk outside your house, maybe 1,000 years ago or more, could have held host to some major human event, some grand murder, or some unfortunate death, or some grand experience that a person connected to and stayed with after they died. That it's not the location per se, it's not the spooky building that looks all abandoned and creepy and dark, that it's about the land, it's about the world, it's about physical existence where something has happened. And at this point in human life, I believe something has happened everywhere. Something has happened here, something has happened over there, something has happened 1,000 yards that way, 1,000 miles that way. Something has happened of human significance, be it societal or personal. Something has happened everywhere. And so everywhere is haunted. It's just a matter of to what degree. So yeah, your sidewalk outside is haunted. It's not as haunted as, say, Waverly Hills Sanatorium or the Manor was, or some other grandiose haunted location, the Mansfield Reformatory, things like that. It's just a matter of how haunted a place is, and I would be hard-pressed to even consider where a place that wouldn't be haunted possibly is. And even places on Earth that somehow, some way, could have been, for all of these years, all of these millennia, completely separated from human life, never touched by human life, I would venture a guess that you might just find spirits there too. Because there are some people in life always, and there are certainly some spirits who want to be where the people aren't, or want where people have never been. And so I think you're going to find that spirits might congregate where humans could never go, into the deepest crevices of Mount Everest, into the hottest lava pits of volcanoes, somewhere where some introvert hundreds or thousands of years ago who passed on decided, this is where I want to spend my existence. This is where I want to spend my afterlife eternity. So the concept of everywhere is haunted is important to me, because it's not just a matter of going to specific locations to find where spirits are. Spirits are everywhere, and you can tune into them everywhere. You can communicate with them everywhere. And yeah, you can communicate with them everywhere. And that makes paranormal work, paranormal research and investigation far more accessible than most anything else to me. And it's a lot more accessible than any piece of media might make it seem. You get this idea that you want to make a show of it, that you want to make a grand statement about it, that things only happen where you feel strange, where you feel scared, where you feel that lead vest feeling like I felt my first investigation. And, well, it's great to find those places, and it's great to seek them out. It doesn't have to be that difficult. You could sit at home and communicate with spirits and connect with the afterlife that exists right beside you always. And some people choose not to do that for obvious reasons, that they don't want to know about the ghosts that are standing right behind them or right next to them always. But me, I'm always fascinated by what's right there in front of you that you just can't see. And that's another major reason why I do paranormal research, because there could be a spirit, an entity, a human being standing right between me and this camera. And unless you tried to communicate, you'd never know. And I don't want to never know. I want to know. And that's why I do what I do.